welcome YouTube as well to the start of your next sessions. Time you guys are seeing this, you did see the end of Dead Island 2's DLC Sola. It's been a while since the stream's seen anything, but that's going to be that part. Um, but we're going to keep going on with the series, and hopefully our games of the 4 rotation will eventually start finishing some of them. So all the games you guys have been seeing for the past few weeks can have their ends eventually. But again, I will reiterate those on the streams. What you're seeing is our part segments of the stream, or not stream. Well, those on YouTube side. God damn it. You're seeing our part segments of my streams in order, just so I'm not giving you guys 3, 4, 5 hour long videos a day. Because you're not going to be able to keep up with it. Because I can barely keep up with the streamers that I watch that do it. Mainly only being one. Well, actually, two. And one streams on Twitch and one streams on YouTube. Can't keep up with them. But in this last session, we had it where uh, Aoko was trying to figure out what to do with Soujuurou, and because she now believes he's the one that saw her use Magecraft, and being spotted using Magecraft will basically result in your death, because it starts a witch hunt, which we've all seen that with Salem witch trials. But let's go ahead and keep going. And no, there was nothing in the archive for us to read. Now the witches. Soujuurou returned to his apartment on foot as per routine, under a blanket of clouds. The hell? Okay, I don't know why people all of a sudden are following me. Under a blanket of clouds in the night sky. The rusty stairs of his apartment building clanged with each step. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the bicycles parked by the apartment building's outer wall. He debated the pros and cons of a bicycle, how much easier life would be versus the expense, the convenience versus the necessity, but then decided one was not right for him just now. Clutching the bag of apples under his arm, he took out the key to his residence. He tilted his head in confusion. More and more he found himself preoccupied with such random thoughts, when the real issue at hand was deciding what to do with the apples he had received. He placed the paper bag by the sink and switched on the lights. It was just after 10 in the evening. With the end of term exams just around the corner, he had come home an hour earlier than usual. Also, he made back for the kitchen to pick one of the apples to snack on. He found an envelope stuffed in his mail slot. The envelope had no name, return address, or stamp. Inside was a single piece of paper that had only the sender's name and a short message. It read,
話があるので、今夜どこそこのここに来られたし、大事なようなので、来るまでずっと待っている。
the concise set of orders neatly written. It was signed Aoko Ozaki. Oh, great. She had been considerate enough to enclose a detailed map of the meeting place. Puzzled, he cocked his head to the side and headed out the door. Oh, great. Aoko wants to meet him. Afterward, upon the room's solo attendant leaving the furnace, the envelope burst into flames and evaporated without a trace. evaporate without a trace as though it never existed in the first place. Sorry, I had to go check my mail. By the late 80s, Japan's post-war economic boom had somewhat stabilized and the city experienced a period of steady growth. The city's modernization marched on, and the Japan Railway's train station, a symbol of the new era, near completion. In Misaki's neighboring town of Yashiori, a new symbol of its own was about to be born. The skyscrapers. Yashiori bred in Kitsy Land. It was Misaki's worst investment. Years later, it would be dubbed the fool's gold of the economic bubble, a relic of a bygone age. 10 years ago, Yasugari's renowned Tokitsu Banking Company ran factories all across the nation. Its proprietor was a middle-aged gentleman, then age 56, by the name of Yurihiko Tokitsu, known affectionately by most as Top Hand. He took it upon himself to begin development on an estate on the outskirts of Yoshigari and broke ground on a recreational wonderland that he hoped to be the pride of Misaki City. The long-awaited opening came in 1981. After 3 years of investments, the local amusement park, full of all kinds of hopes and dreams, began its short-lived tenure. It covered more than 85 square acres. Its magnificent merry-go-round dazzled all who passed through the park's gates. Its roller coaster twisted and turned about the edges of the park like a withering Japanese dragon. Its Ferris wheel, packed beyond necessity with gimmicks, was said to have tested the limits of modern engineering. Old Yurihiko looked upon his creation and smiled. Only boosting his confidence was the fact that its grand opening was staged during a period of prosperity, the springtime of the world. But, in spite of this, they splendidly miscalculate the balance between aspirations and sophistication. Its mascot, Kitsy, was poorly designed and appeared like a cheap knockoff. The park was stuffed to the brim with bread stands. Even its impossible to navigate mirror maze seemed out of date from the start. There are no dreams to be had in Kitsyland, only nightmarish satire. Numerous trade magazines lambasted Kitsyland's shortcoming, and customer attendance declined. There was even an incident where a 6-year-old strayed from his mother, had an accident, and nearly died. 1986, 5 years after the park opened. The situation had grown from bad to worse, and the park was hemorrhaging money. On top of everything, Yurihiko, who had bet everything on the success of mascot Kitty, retired, and Kitsyland's operations were officially in trouble. And thus, amidst the scorn of nearly all residents in the area, ended Misaki City's one and only amusement park. What's more, perhaps best described as a footnote in this debacle, the self-proclaimed Persian artist who designed the mascot, Toki Jushli, was said to have snapped his brush in mourning over the closure of the park. Returning to the present, it was midnight and the Kitsyland of today was a shadow of its former glory. Like a doll abandoned in the corner of a toy box, the lonely park was illuminated only by the light of the town that continued to live around it. Soujuurou closed the Yasugari guidebook that he had picked up on the way here. The story of its history was almost difficult to believe, but he supposed this was what people referred to as a troppery. Entropy, sorry. The park's front gate was unlocked. When he worked here the previous time, the iron fence was locked shut with a rusty chain, but the chain was nowhere to be seen, and the gate left ajar. Following the map drawn to the letter, Soujuurou quickly made his way inside.
急ぎのようなんだろうけど、こんな夜中に何なんだ一体。
Soujuurou complained, quite out of character for him. It was probably because, in spite of his naivety, even he knew that something was amiss. Though the park was abandoned, this was still trespassing. Unlawful entry, larceny, burglary. These were concerns, not things, or perhaps crimes that Soujuurou was proud to do, but
すまない。お金は払えないんだ。ただで入って申し訳ない。
money apparently was why his conscience was gnawing at him. He clapped his hands in apology toward the statue of Kitsy, on whose eyes the paint had begun to aptly dissolve. Soujuurou passed the mascot bleeding red paint from his eye sockets and began to walk the night park. The building's colors had faded. The collection of machines was rusted. The man-made residence no longer left the passage of time. Even the ghosts themselves could not endure the disparity between this forsaken place and its previous grand stature. It was like a fossilized dream. These were the ruins of a paradise both created and abandoned by man in reality. The economy had stabilized, and the standard of living was on the rise. Nobody was overly concerned with the future. These were the remains of a wild and exciting era. His breath turning to white west before him, Soujuurou continued through the abandoned amusement park. Though void of human presence, this was not nearly as frightening as the darkness deep in the mountains. City suburbs can take on many forms, but Kidsyland was unusual for an amusement park, in so much as it had been built adjacent to a residential district. The park was surrounded by a forest, but even then, ultimately, was man-made. It was no different from the curtains of a classroom window. If he were to scale the iron fence encircling Kidsyland and break through the 20 yards of forested trees, he could make it back to a familiar landscape or townscape. Wow, I can't even fucking read. Though the amusement park tended to arouse dread in the city folk, to Soujuurou it was a little different from the commotion and terror of downtown.
あれか。
The central plaza was as silent as a grave. According to the map, the meeting spot was west of here. Waiting for Soujuurou at his destination was a rugged, imposing, magnificent castle towering before the backdrop of a cloudy night sky. Even for an abandoned park, it was a remarkable structure. If the roller coaster and Ferris wheel were loud, and tense attractions, this was comparatively quiet and easygoing. It was one of Kitsyland's three iconic structures, and in a way, the wicked fortress that guided this paradise down the path of closure. Generally speaking, amusement park mazes generally fell into one of two categories: labyrinths, which disorient visitors with their sheer size, and mirror houses, which disorient visitors with optical illusions. Many of the labyrinth's guests enjoyed the brief sense of adventure that it afforded. Over the years, however, it would be usurped by the ever-increasing thrills of new attractions. Such was the way of all trends, the curse of fads. The new must give way for the newer. On the other hand, the House of Mirrors was a time-honored beloved staple. Even within the confines of a classroom's dimensions, well-placed mirrors and well-directed light could both perplex and delight its visitors. And figuring in the cost of maintenance, a well-designed house of mirrors could far outlive its labyrinth brethren. Even if both types faded into obscurity, they would remain a staple of what constituted an amusement park. However, that didn't mean that combining them would produce double the fun. Together they transformed from entertainment into an uncanny realm from which those who dared to step within could never leave. Yeah, you don't do a mirror maze with a labyrinth. In a similar sense, Kitsy's Mystery Tower Castle was the park's very own otherworld. Indeed, 5% of visitors ended up requesting staff assistance to get out. Modeled after European castles, it was greater than a football field in length, and the interior was further split into 3 floors. 2 floors above ground and 1 below, lined with mirrors from top to bottom, equal parts complex and vast. The maze demanded at least 30 minutes even for veterans. One visit was all it took to be struck by catastrophe for hours. It was this labyrinth that now stood in Soujuurou's way.
真っ暗ってわけじゃないな。電気とかついてるんだろうか。
It seemed that Soujuurou, unaware of what a house of mirrors even was, concerned himself only with its lighting. He checked the letter from Aoko once more. The letter read, "I will be waiting in the first floor lobby of the House of Mirrors." That meeting place was definitely in here. There was something to see at least, as he could make out light faintly through the open windows. Putting aside his suspicions, he headed toward the entrance. The sound of his steps against the brick-laid path echoed faintly. He was far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The park's clocks no longer made tick nor talk, and the winter's bite no longer blew in the night. Wow, I really had to rhyme there. From within the silence, the stillness that would cause any onlooker to hold their breath. Soujuurou stopped abruptly at the entrance of the House of Mirrors.
ところで青崎、そんなところで何してるんだ？
He called out, turning back toward the plaza. A sound rang out as if someone had dove behind a garbage can, and it fell to the ground in their haste. Short silence ensued. For a moment, the abandoned park returned to its previous hush. Resigned to her having been exposed, a girl appeared from her hiding place.
Oh.
His voice died in his throat as he took in the sight of the girl's familiar face in unfamiliar attire. This Aoko, with her long hair flowing in the breeze, was different from the Aoko that Soujuurou knew. This is the mage, Aoko. The resolute stance and posture she took excluded the strength of her will. She stared directly at him with a sharp-eyed, piercing gaze. Her eyes were glowing with a dim, phasonic light, enough to give Soujuurou pause that he might be hallucinating. An icy coldness in a girl's strength. Soujuurou lacked a sense of danger, but the sense of imbalance caused even him, to feel the malice in the air. It was as though the Yuki Onna spirit of folklore had climbed out from a ghost story and appeared here in reality.
Aozaki.
Instinctively, Soujuurou took a step back. Surprised, he even started to feel concerned. Or he was starting to feel concerned. An unpleasant premonition rose to the surface, bringing with it a sense of anxiety. In spite of this, he felt obliged to honor urban etiquette by seeing if she was all right.
その顔を見るに何かあったのかと一応聞いておくんだけど。
Without acknowledging him, Aoko took a step forward. Her figure, this atmosphere, Soujuurou found himself recalling a recent memory. His twisted and apprehension melted away and was replaced with a growing realization. The girl before him was very similar to someone he had seen before, that night in the park, though he had only seen her from behind. With increasing certainty causing him to swallow nervously, he noted that they might as well have been identical.
何をしていたかって話なら見ての通りよ。ここで獲物が通り過ぎるのを待ってたの。あなたが入ってから私も入って逃げ道をなくすつもりだったから。
Aoko said, perturbed by the swift change in plans.
そうか。待ち合わせ場所は合ってたんだな。
Soujuurou was mildly relieved he had not got the wrong place. It was unclear whether he felt confident about dealing with what was to come, or if he had simply failed to grasp the hopelessness of the situation. Aoko ignored his obstinate response and continued.
私はね、しずきくん。嫌いな人とか憎い人とかは人並みにいるんだ。ただ、ちょっと変なのが敵になるやつの条件でね。
Cold immersion burned in her eyes. Her had already moved one step closer to Soujuurou. Soujurou's sense of foreboding was growing stronger. Wondering if what he sensed was bloodlust, he retreated another step. Continuing as so, they maintained a distance of just 15 feet.
昔から私は嫌いな相手でも敵と思ったことはなかったの。でも逆に好きな相手を敵だと思うこともあった。理由は単純。
She held her right arm out. The light about her was no illusion.
当たり前のことだけど、私は私の感情を乱すやつが敵なのよ。
Her arm moved again. It was instantaneous. Something shot past Soujuurou in the blink of an eye, missing him by just a foot to his left. Before his eyes, a blue light, something akin to a fireball, had ignited from nothing. He finally understood what was happening.
ちょっと待った。今のは大変見覚えがある。
She ignored his dim-witted reaction.
外したか。
Aoko muttered to herself. Well, of course. The fist-sized hole the blue light had made in the house of mirrors crackled and smoldered. A shot like that could easily cave in a human skull in addition to burning it to a crisp.
ああ、こんな射程で外すなんてアリスに見られたら自殺者ね。でもこれで分かったでしょ。二度目だものね。
Soujuurou backed away swiftly. Things were beyond incomprehensible. He was close to losing the ability to think at all. All he could make out was the figure of the dependable student council president, or at least what he had thought was the president, and the memories of the park that night 2 days ago. He had never experienced anything like this, though most people living in a civilized country would have never seen anything like it either. A lethal weapon that could kill with nothing more than the pull of a finger had a way of suspending the ability of its target to determine between not just good and evil, but dreams and reality, past and future. And the most peaceful someone's life had been, the stronger that suspicion was likely to be. All that one could think about was the fact that they were alive at that very moment. Oh, no shit. Yes, Heaven, what? It was as if he was an unwritten character on a blank page, piece of white paper. There was no before, there was no after, there was only what came next. This was very common thought process for anyone staring down the barrel of a gun.
あ、命乞いはやめてね。意味ないから。でも、恨み事ならご自由に。殺す側の義務として一言一句聞いてあげる。
By saying it was pointless, she made it sound more like she would not listen to what he had to say. However, Soujuurou was in such a state of shock that it did not even enter his mind to speak up. All he knew, for reasons unknown, was that the girl in front of him wanted him dead.
嘘つきにも程がある。飛び丸のバカ。何がそんな生き物はいないだ。実際いるじゃないか、こんなお化けみたいなのが。
Soujuurou felt that if he had said it out loud, the second blast would come even quicker than the last, so he kept it to himself. His mental expletives stirred his mind from paralysis to mere panic. This response came not from confidence, however. Someday, out of the blue, someone is going to kill me. While it may have seemed like a baseless belief to hold,
でもそうだった。都会には殺人事件がある。ルールを破れば殺されるのは当たり前だって、ちゃんと教えてもらってた。
to Soujuurou, the situation seemed to perfectly align with his inexperience, understanding that the city was a coldly pragmatic place. As far as he was concerned at this moment, being killed by a classmate was not something to be so surprised by. In a society where murder was possible, he was able to accept this sort of situation as natural. Of virtually no concern was the series of events that led to Ako's aggression toward him. The only thing that truly confused him was Ako's blue fireball. Soujuurou swallowed with an audible gulp. To anyone who may have been watching, it was the response of a victim paralyzed by fear.
そういうことよ。ようやく理解してくれたわね。多くは語らないけど、あなたにはここで死んでもらう。魔術は隠匿するものなんて言っても、そっちには関係のないことだし、単に運がなかったって思えばいいわ。大事なのは、私があなたを殺したってことだけだから。
Done talking, Aoko once again lifted her right arm. There was a hum like a machine. Blue light began to resolve about her arm beneath her sleeve. This was taking longer than last time, leading Soujuurou to believe that it was going to be much stronger than the attack that was still scorching the wall behind him. The realization caused his panic to heighten.
いやなんだつまり始末するとかしないとかあの夜のお化けは青崎だったとか都会は本当に込み入ってるとかそういうことじゃなくて
His thoughts became jumbled. His heart pounded like a hammer. This was no time to be standing still. He was not sure if the girl in front of him was really human. And more importantly, if he could accept the events unfolding before him. When all was said and done,
待て人殺しはいけないんだぞ
even if it was a facet of life in the city, Soujuurou was not about to lie down and die.
分かってるわよ、そんなことは。
Soujuurou's scream, still entirely oblivious, was just the thing to invoke Ako's full wrath. Multi-shot, uh-oh. Aoko fired a barrage of magical blue bullets. In an instant, Soujuurou dashed into the shadows behind him, into the entrance of the House of Mirrors. Bagecraft is a scary fucking thing in the Fate series. And if those who've not caught on, Type Moon, they've been known for their Fate series, but they also have, of course, Witch on a Holy Night, Tsukihime, and Garden of Sinners. Those are all in the same universe. Because the clock tower's in all of them. He darted furiously down the hall. After a mere few feet, he was left completely out of breath. This was due to his shock at seeing yet another attack fiercer than the first that he had never seen in his life, and because he couldn't shake the thought that if he had moved even a second later, he would be dead. He could not afford to stop. The sound of merciless footsteps closed in behind him.
けど助かったここならなんとか
He threw everything into his legs as he sprinted. Straight, narrow passage about 60 feet long connected the entrance to the main lobby. At this rate, if he could make it to the lobby, he was sure he could be able to find as many hiding spots as he needed.
助かった
He arrived at a large open space. This was the first floor lobby, where there were 3 passageways. One led to the basement floor, one connected to the first floor maze, and the other was set of stairs leading to the second floor. Soujuurou did not particularly care which one he chose, so trusting his intuition, he made a run for the first floor maze when he smacked his head into a transparent wall.
鏡
ええ、面倒だけど、それならフェアでしょ。追いかける方にも逃げる方にも有利不利がある。
A somehow cheerful voice echoed in his direction. There was no need for Soujuurou to even turn around. At the very same mirror he had crashed into, he could see Ako's figure slowly approaching.
それと、1階の奥にある出口は封鎖しといたから。結界じゃなくて物理的に。 やりすぎて封鎖っていうより瓦礫？土砂崩れ？どっちでもいっか。とにかく下手に出口に近づくと崩落に巻き込まれるから。
Panicked by the impending footsteps, Soujuurou groped for the wall. He could see the stairs to the second floor. He did not understand what Aoko had meant earlier, but he at least knew that the first floor was not going to save him.
ま、私としてはそっちのが助かるけど。形式上、事故死の方が後始末とか楽だから。
Behind him was a creature beyond words. As she continued her idle taunting, she lifted her right arm obstinately. Even from above her clothes, one could see some kind of strange, incongruous pattern upon her body. Her circuits, the veins beneath her skin, they made it seem as though something inhuman was circulating her body. No, heaven! Not on my desk, please. Whether out of pity or repulsion, Soujuurou stopped for just a moment. His pursuer evaded his gaze.
ああ、これ？普段は塗り薬で隠しているんだけど、今日は特別。魔術刻印って言ってね。
Say, magical
魔術師
crest
の証みたいなものよ。
or their circuits.
ほら、光が回ってるでしょ。これがさっきのスナップ。わかりやすく言うと弾丸の元。今日は調子いいし、私魔力を効率よく使うのだけは自信あるし。うん、あと30回ぐらいかな。
Perhaps she was on an emotional high, for her voice had become frightfully friendly. The substance of the conversation could not have been any more unsettling, however.
そもそも何を言っているかよくわからないんだけど、青崎。
わからない？段数はあと30発ってこと。そこまで逃げ切ればあなたの勝ちよ。とりあえず今日のところはね。
今日はって明日もあるのかな。
Soujuurou knit his brows. Ako's expression ceased, or creased into a skull at his behavior. Although he was panicking, it seemed that deep down he still did not feel the full weight of the crisis. She knew he still didn't get it.
宣言はしたわ。自由時間はこれでおしまい。まだ罵り足りないだろうけど、ま、その手の時間はキリがないしね。この辺りで諦めて。
It appeared Aoko had prepared this theatrical dialogue ahead of time, not to allow her opponent time for futile pleading, but to give him the time to curse her, his killer. Such forthrightness was her modest propriety. With this victim, however, it was not going as she had hoped.
とにかくそういうことだから。じゃ、狩りの時間と行きましょうか。
Her voice was void of emotion, and her eyes ruthless as they bored into her prey. This time, Soujuurou finally accepted that he was going to die. Silent as the dead, it stepped into the remnants of a dream that had long since seen no visitors. There was no wind this night, nor a soul to be seen. Still, it heard echoes from within, clasping his hands together and grinned. Its form, with hands clasped, resembled that of a budding tulip. Its bearing of this artificial flower reflected in the cloudy mirror of the ticket attendant's office next to the gate. Next to it stood a display board, corroded by years upon years of rust. Number of visitors today, 2. Number of blank today, blank. The board had graffiti crudely scribbled atop one of the words. It was replaced with deaths. The records board was long ago fallen to disrepair. After taking a full 10 seconds to digest what it was looking at, it made its own revision. Number of visitors today, 3. Number of deaths today, 1. After Appending this number to with an index finger, she smiled like a flower. Then she began to walk toward the source of the sound. It had been 10 minutes since this recipe had begun to echo from the House of Mirrors. The amusement park's entrance returned to as it was before, soulless. That was Alice. Has to be. In the end, even if Soujuurou had been the luckiest man alive, there was no way he should have been able to escape. The question, however, was how much of this was by design, and how much was sheer coincidence. Even Aoko, who had made all the arrangements, had no answer. Indeed, there was only three things she could say. It was taking longer than expected, he was putting up more resistance than she had anticipated, and that choosing the House of Mirrors had been a mistake. She had really screwed the pooch on this one. The location itself was an excellent choice, as the House of Mirrors was perfect as a hunting ground, but seeing her own incompetence reflected in the mirrors was beginning to grate on her. The moment Akko's right hand began to grow, Soujuurou made a beeline for the staircase in front of him. A stumbling series of blue flashes lit the room behind him. The hunter calmly followed her prey, and the prey desperately ran for his life up the stairs.
注文通り。そうでなくっちゃお膳立てした甲斐がない。
In stark contrast to Soujurou's frenzied escape, Aoko walked briskly up the stairs. She elected not to run after her prey in order to maintain a set distance. As she lacked confidence in her accuracy, she would be most challenged if Soujuurou bull rushed her and went down fighting. But at a distance of 30 or so feet, he posed no threat. By the time her prey drew near, she could fire 10 shots and hit, with at least 4 of them. Their positioning just a moment ago hadn't been ideal. At this distance, in a space this open, there's a chance, however, small, that it could turn into a fistfight if he flanked or charged her. Flanked and charged her. Currently, Ako's best weapon was the bullets from her right arm. If she was going to capitalize on that advantage, it was in her best interest not to close the gap between them. If there was a good time to approach, it was only after her prey had become exhausted and had lost the will to continue. Would she pierce his leg, shoot him in the back, or perhaps would he just give up after losing himself in the labyrinth? The hunt would end when her target sustained some sort of injury and became unable to run. On Soujurou's end, he could barely bite back on screaming as he bolted through the maze. Even running in a straight line had become difficult, much less searching for an exit. Another mirror. The corridor stretched out far before him, or so the mirrors blocking the path had made it seem. Panic, he made a turn to the right. Nope. Clutching his head in his right arm, Soujuurou led with his left, groping through the air to see whether the wall was there or not. He dove down the hall to the left, narrowly dodging the bullets targeting his life. Urged on by the sound of approaching footsteps, he ran without thinking. That last one was close. A hair closer would have meant his life. He caught the odor of burnt hair from the back of his neck. He was very lucky. Or perhaps very unlucky. If he were actually lucky, he would not be in this situation in the first place. The second floor of the House of Mirrors was structured like a giant spiral. It wound left, starting from the outside wall. Eventually, it would lead to a dead end. The more he tried to escape, the more cornered he would become, as though he were trapped in a twisted guillotine. His stifled screams threatened to leak out as complaints. No matter what he did, he was going to be killed. All of his struggling merely served to prolong the inevitable. Yet he ran. No matter how many mirrored walls he rammed himself into, he ran. Even after crashing so hard that his forehead bled and he saw stars, he ran. Pain shot through him at every turn. The more frankly he ran, the more intensely he smashed into the invisible walls. His body began to understand this rule and begged him not to run anymore. His breath was already rugged after sprinting a couple hundred feet. No matter how he thought about it, this was not normal. This was way too crazy. This was all just a bad joke. If he turned around now, she would apologize to him for taking it too far. His mind had gone blank as his body continued to slam into the mirrors again and again. His feet slowly began to believe that perhaps it really was all a joke, but then he felt a chill, a touch of death upon his neck. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Soujuurou knew this kind of terrible chill far too well. Ever since he had arrived in the city, he had come face to face with more than one or two near-death experiences. For someone who did not understand city life, his present predicament was not unlike what he experienced when he experienced traffic on the streets or the commuter rush on the station platform. He was far from the innocent babe, unable to comprehend life or fear. Rather, everything he had known became irrelevant when he was flung to a completely different cultural sphere. When society's promises of safety, something urban trees took for granted, were threats unknown. So he was used to this already. Though if he were to be honest, he was dissatisfied with some things. Oh great. These things superfluous to necessity. This world was overflowing with valueless things, and they were all dangerous in some way. Even the everyday necessities sold at a convenience store were, as far as he was concerned, amazing tools. Civilization had raised the standard of living so high that it had numbed humanity's sense of danger. The city's constant pursuit of wealth and convenience was a poison to a country boy like Soujuurou. Well, yeah, it always has been. And that is the sad thing most people don't understand. Uh, that it was possible for such conveniences to easily and suddenly be misused and cause unattended accidents had always made him anxious. Why? He had to wonder why he was even here. How ironic. It took the real threat of death to finally make him realize, like a divine revelation, what he failed to understand until now. He had always had to expect the unexpected. Near-death experiences were more common than one might think. To begin with, safety was something that came at a price. Being alive meant that the opposite was always lurking around the corner. It was just like a street light at night. When the sun rose, its illumination would naturally disappear. Another barrage of strange projectiles whizzed mercilessly by him. He recalled in the back of his mind the charred remains of someone at the hands that blue flame 2 nights prior. Somehow this situation reminded him of a horse being led by a dangling carrot. For now, he lifted his head and continued to run through the labyrinth. But for what purpose? Though he knew the pain in his chest was very real, he felt disconnected from it. The night sky visible through the skylight was a muddy ultimaria, no longer resembling the one he knew, and managed to calm himself. Soujuurou began to laugh in despair as though something rather peculiar had been broken. Everything had become meaningless anyway. Even so, his legs somehow made their way forward at the sight of her reflection in the mirror. Like a game of cat and mouse, Soujuurou fled through the labyrinth of mirrors. Then, after 4 minutes, that strangely unreal tension ended. Ooh. The night shot of blue light hit inches away from him. It exploded the moment it made impact, launching Soujuurou into the opposite wall. Of all the fire he had taken thus far, this shot indisputably brought him the closest to death. Grunting, he collapsed to the floor. His back was on fire with pain. He was not bleeding and was lucky he could still even scream. Yet his body refused to move. Physically and mentally, he still had something to spare. The pain was not so bad that he couldn't get back up. It was just that there was a skylight above him and he could glimpse the dark of the night sky beyond. The feeling that overcame him was a raw, selfless bout of grief. Oh, it was just so cruel to have to stare at that for the remainder of whatever short life he had left. Soujurou's regular breathing slowed. For all intents and purposes, he had given up. He had given up fleeing from the pursuing footsteps and perhaps even the root of all his problems.
まあ青崎に殺されるなら
Soujuuro Suzuki felt things that, in any other circumstance, he would never feel. Instantly, without exaggeration or embezzlement, it was the only mistake he had ever made in his entire life. Staring vaguely into the night sky above, Soujuuro listened as the footsteps grew near.
ギブアップ？
It was the closest her voice had ever been to him. Perhaps feeling that he really had given up, she approached his collapsed form. In the dark, mirror-lined corridor, he could not make out her expression. Without a word, Soujuuro raised his eyes to meet his murderer.
返事がないならそれでいいけど。調子狂うわ。普通どうして殺そうとするのかぐらい聞くものじゃない？
Aoko spoke from within the shadows. His eyes widened in bewilderment. Now that she had mentioned it, he realized that would have been the obvious question to ask. He had more or less picked up on the fact that he was being killed for learning some secret, but it was human nature to want to know more.
そっかそれはそうなるな
Simple affirmation. His face was a mixture of resignation and forlorn longing. He thought for a moment before.
でも言う必要はない聞きたくないんだそういうのは
He responded in a mature, subdued voice. His response was clear, rather gently so.
そう。じゃ、殺すけど。死ぬの怖くないの？
怖いに決まってる何より痛そうだ
His face turned whereas he objected, to which Aoko frowned. As nonchalant as he could be, he was honest about his feelings.
そりゃ怖いでしょ。私だって怖いと思うし。でも悪いわね。我慢して。人でなしと罵ってくれて結構よ。今の私は本当にその通りだから。そういった意味じゃあんたと同じ。普通の道徳がないのよ。だから必要なら人も殺せる。
Sujurou's fingers twitched in response to her indifferent tone, as if to say that despite having given up on just about everything, his body could not let those words slide.
人殺しなんてよくないぞ
分かってるって言ってるでしょ。
Aoko raised her right hand. The light from the crest illuminated her face. It goes without saying that her expression was unchanged. She was not crying, nor was she smiling. She was a young woman who had excised her feelings. Deal with it was another thing Soujuuro could not let slide. Soujuuro could read on Ako's face that she was not herself. She was in pain, and to a degree he had never seen in her.
すまないちょっといいかな
何？ここまで悲壮感を盛り上げておいて、やっぱり逃げるなんてのは却下よ。
He unconsciously smiled at Ako's ruthless counter and breathed a sigh of relief. He had misread the pain he saw in her face. This was the same Aoko. Soujuuro laughed out loud in genuine joy, a laugh that most other people would have taken as an insult.
遺言でも聞いてあげようと思った私が甘かった。っていうか、今の小バカにした笑いがあんたの遺言ってことでオッケー？
いや、そうじゃなくて、あそこにいる人は青崎の友人なのか？
Out of nowhere, Soujuurou put it behind Aoko.
はあ
Aoko thought it must have been that old unused distraction technique. This had been a Japanese comedy act, it would be the part where she gave him a whack with a paper fan. But after giving it a second thought, she realized she didn't have the capacity for understanding old or even new tricks.
あんた何言って。
Perhaps his honest disposition had been to his benefit. Without thinking, Akko gave in to her curiosity, turned her gaze toward the direction in which his finger was pointed. And there, something that should not have been in the maze, something with a creaking wooden smile. It's one of the dolls. It's not. Okay. Now we're about to have these two both fight Magecraft. It was an ominous, creepy, uncanny figure of a girl.
人形
The unusual figure with 2 arms and 2 legs stood silently in the darkness. If only for a moment, its beauty, which was even apparent from afar, dulled the insanity of the current situation. Extend, extend, extend. The utterly unknown threat made Aoko freeze on the spot. Avoiding it didn't even occur to her. Humans possess intelligence and knowledge, but when confronted with the unknown, they fail to process what to do, and a shriek escaped Akko's mouth. The magical attack crossed the 30-foot gap in an instant. The arm of the girl who had appeared at the rear of the corridor was slender and quick. It extended to a near possible length, striking Aoko from behind. Aoko crashed into the wall as she fought back in anguished whimper. The attacker retracted her arm.
Aozaki!
Soujuurou sprung to his feet. He darted to her side and used all of the strength he could muster to get her to her feet. He could not believe how light she was. And Soujuurou Aoko was an extraordinary individual. He expected that he were to ever touch her, it would be apparent she was far stronger than he. But in reality, she felt about as heavy as you would expect a 100-pound girl to feel. Meanwhile, that thing continued to reel it in his arm as if it were some sort of mechanism. Having extended more than 30 feet from the elbow joint, it clanked as it returned to its previous shape and size.
大丈夫か？
やめてよ。わからないわ。なんでそんな顔できるの。
Aoko tore her hand away from Soujurou's. Suddenly, she felt her knees buckle from under her, but Soujuurou caught her before she could hit the ground, helped her to her
無理す
feet.
るな。で、あいつは知り合いか？
He looked back at the eerie shadow 30 feet away as it finished retracting its arm.
そうね。似たようなやつとは命をせめぎ合った仲よ。
Aoko grabbed her lower back as she answered. A searing pain shot through her.
でも痛いっちゃ痛いけど、あれだけ絶好の奇襲をしておいて、それともこの距離じゃ当たっても致命傷にならない。
So this is all in her head.
あるわけないか。
Aoko tried to steady her breathing as she assessed the damage done to her back. The pain was quick to fade and her breathing returned to normal. For the time being, her motor functions were no longer hindered, which meant the real damage was elsewhere.
青崎、あれ。
分かってるわ。黙ってて。
The blue light growing across the gloom, the magical energy generated by her breathing was accumulating in her right arm. If magical energy was the fuel, the formula was the igniter. For Aoko, this was a little more than a reenactment of 2 evenings ago. Next time the puppet extends arm, Aoko would fire a magical bullet as fast as she could. Battle at approximately 30 feet. As long as Aoko could secure a 2-second window, she could create a counterattack to end their duel. It made its move. With its head tilted down, there was no expression to be seen, and in the darkness, its apparent age was impossible to make out. To the two humans, the puppet was not dissimilar to a faceless ghost. Its left arm slowly came up with a grinding sound. Its movements were dull, as if the joints were rusty. The right arm, which had been extended earlier, hung at his side. Though the puppet's mouth was hidden by its long locks, the sense was that it was smiling.
さっきと用途が違う。あれが本命。しずきくん、どいて。
She threw herself into Sunshine, extended her hand, its arm extended at that very moment. The timing was impeccable. In a single second, Ako's snap bullet scored a direct hit on the puppet's arm, throwing off its trajectory and sending it crashing into the puppet's body with a violent explosion. Or at least, that is what would have happened had the magical formula been invoked. No magic. She barely avoided being struck once again. When her magecraft failed, her intuition took over and she just managed to get away.
やられた。最初のはそういうことか。
She clenched her teeth in frustration, her thoughts racing a mile a minute. Fight or flight. It only had one arm left, which would take time to retract. This was the best shot Aoko had at defeating it. She could even evade the right arm just a fraction. She could get close enough to.
Vivo in sum, solitare putresc inferis. Ictius mes obitus dies, et meus nativus dies. Teobeam.
Uh-oh. A crackle echoed through the corridor. A poetic murmur contained enough magical energy for a mage to perceive. The verse itself was Latin, but it contained hints the language of curses. Gundor. Originally, they were words meant to curse a hated adversary. However,
Mea animae mortalis, otem eftura negata sunt. Manes sum, animam definire ambiguum est. Teodi et am, conveniamus insomnio ipso.
the puppet was directing the words at itself. Curses beget curses. The victims called down a curse on the assailant, creating a vicious cycle of negativity. The incantation was meant to do just that. However, this was ultimately a one-puppet show. Unprecedented source of power akin to auto-intoxication. As unbelievable as it seemed, the cycle of curses had been turned into a professional motion device.
何それ、レベル高すぎじゃない。
Aoko abandoned her anxiety, digging her heels in. It was time to flee with all due haste.
何してんの、あんたも来る。
She grabbed Soujurou's hand and ran as fast as she could, deeper into the realm of mirrors. The crackling voice continued murmuring behind them.
Proximi mich negligentes ferunt. Omnes nos peccantes fims. Et omnes nos edem fims. Omnes nos peccatores sums. Venit domum meum. Lut simile somnium. Et pulvere simile quotidianum. Corprebo. Te judico.
Te delicto. Death be upon ya. Aoko fought against the pain in her back as she ran through the mirrored corridor. She dragged Soujuurou by the hand.
青崎、傷は
別に背骨がしびれてる程度よ。内臓は平気だし、出血もないみたい。